Hey guys, it's Wayne Santos, one of the editors here at CGM, and for this week's Sound Off, we're going to be sounding off about, not in a necessarily negative way, we're going to be sounding off about Mark Zuckerberg and Oculus Rift. In an earnings call this week, and for those of you that don't know, an earnings call is basically the guy in charge of a company basically hosts a phone call that the investors can listen to sort of, it's like tell them what's up with the company and where things are going and what they're going to be doing with the money, blah, blah, blah. Zuckerberg said in this earnings call with regards to Oculus Rift that his ambitions for the technology are that he would like to sell, and I quote, 50 million to 100 million units in the next few years. Okay, now that is an absolutely monstrous number, but he goes on to elaborate that basically what he's thinking of is a 10-year plan. It's like he's not expecting that they're going to say, like, within the first year of launch, 50 million people are using VR, but it's like 10 years from now, you might have 50 million, you might have 100 million, and his thinking for this is, at least when it comes to computational devices, he theorizes that you always have like this big leap where a new platform comes along. It's like at one point it was video game consoles, and then desktop PCs finally had their day in the sun, and then we moved over to smartphones, and then we moved over to tablets. And basically Zuckerberg is saying that he spent $2 billion of Facebook's money gambling on the idea that Oculus Rift, also known as virtual reality, is going to be that next big computational platform that everybody is going to be making the leap to. Now, this strikes me as very, very interesting because most of the time people try to predict where this kind of technological revolution is going to come from, and normally they're pretty wrong about it. Like, it's like nobody actually saw the smartphone coming. I mean, like, there for a while there, if anybody can remember the 80s, there was a time when all the latest thing was a car phone, and people were actually really, really serious about taking telephone calls in their cars, and these phones had cords that went like straight down into like the glove compartment or the handbrake or any of those other places, and that obviously, it's like did not take off. It's like it was the same thing with fax machines. For a while there, fax machines were going to be the way of the future because it was a way to send off documents across phone lines. And of course the internet, which again, nobody had predicted, that sort of came along and, created a whole new game board and a whole new set of rules that nobody was prepared to play. Now, what Mark Zuckerberg is doing is he is actually trying to predict and steer the course of virtual reality. I think it's interesting because one of the things that he says, which actually does make a lot of sense, is that he is targeting it primarily as a gaming device in the beginning, because gamers are early adopters, and if something is fun and people like it, then that has the possibility of starting to trend, and then everybody else jumps on the bandwagon. If you try and push it, from day one as this is the great new computing platform, which is going to be the evolution in how we interact with our devices, that probably comes off as a little more boring and not as interesting as you can actually be in the room with Lara Croft, it's like ogling her cleavage in 3D, it's like, or touching it, which I'm sure is something that, it's like the Japanese are feverishly working on because, oh, those Japanese, you gotta love them. But getting back to the point, I think that it is going to be really, really interesting if in the next year, and it probably is going to be 2015 when Oculus Rift and Project Morpheus launches, we see whether or not this gambling is going to pay off, because there is actually a precedent for planned technology integration, if you want to call it that. It's like Sony has tried it repeatedly and failed with things like Betamax and all that, but then they came up with Blu-ray and they actually managed to get that through. So this time it's both Sony and Facebook kind of like looking at this and establishing an uneasy, unspoken alliance where they both want to see this thing take off, and they don't want it to turn into a format war, which is going to divide the audience, because that is the last thing that virtual reality needs if it's going to be widely adopted. So whether or not Zuckerberg and Sony's prediction is going to pay off really boils down to, are they going to have a product on this technology that's going to make people go, yes, I have to have it, and are they actually going to be able to price it in just such a way that most people are going to afford it, as opposed to the early adopters who buy it the first time, show it off to their friends, and their friends are like, wow, that's great, where can I get one? And they say, well, you can get it for $12,000, and that's pretty much the end of that trend right there. See ya.